Hello everyone, welcome back to Trek a Day and another Trek Chat, a bunch of brief topics to go through, and then we'll return to a handful more episodes in the TNG rewatch. I'll probably do a bunch of those in the next round to wrap up Season 1. But for now, we have a look at the upcoming Rose Bowl parade float for Star Trek, celebrating its 60th anniversary as things start coming together for that upcoming event. I think there's still a lot more that's not been unveiled that possibly could be happening next year for that, as well as some updates on some of those upcoming nacelle Star Trek action figures, which I'm really loving the plans they have so far. Just kind of wish they were coming a little bit sooner, but we have a look at some more upcoming figures, as well as a definitive timeline for the first few waves. Wave 1 will definitely be out before Christmas, so then the next few months, and then waves 2 and 3 at some point next year. So hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have waves 1 through 3 and pre-orders through for waves 4 and 5. I hope they do well because I love the concepts they're coming up with for these figures. And then some more kind of rumor mill stuff, which I normally don't do a lot of, but really seems to line up with where I think things are going. So it makes a lot of sense and just to me feels like it's probably realistically what's going on. Behind the scenes, it seems like Starfleet Academy is going to be launching Season 1 in either January or February, very early next year. That's pretty much what I predicted. I really think we're still going to be seeing the timeline of Season 1 of that show, January or February of next year. Season 4 of Strange New Worlds, either early spring or sometime early in the summer. And then Season 5 of Strange New Worlds and Season 2 of Academy before the end of next year. And that pretty much wrapping up this era of Star Trek after the merger, just kind of tying up loose ends and finishing up these productions. So we're already kind of had the ball rolling, and we're moving along before, while this process was happening. And also the other kind of rumor behind the scenes that is that Skydance and Paramount in their post-merger process, thinking along the lines of what are they going to do with Star Trek. How are they going to structure things? We talked a bit about this before in the broader sense, but it seems that one of the shows that they've been looking at and really just seeing that the cost-benefit ratio is just not favorable is this Academy show. It seems that the show just does not seem viable for whatever this next era of Star Trek is going to be, and I believe that because that's sort of the sense that I've been getting even as this thing went into production, is that it was already slated to have 2 seasons before Season 1 was even anywhere near done production, and I thought it's going to be 2 and done. It's just that's what it's going to be, and that seems to be more confirming that, and that it just doesn't seem like a show that could attract enough of a new audience or drive enough revenue through viewers or come up with enough in terms of merchandising or really any angle to recoup the cost of a show of that scope. It just doesn't seem like an idea that could be a financially successful show. So I would not be surprised if it's a show that is just they get these 2 seasons out and then it's just gone. Now, a handful of TNG episodes, and I want to leave you with a question at the end here. But continuing on with 11001001, I really enjoy this episode while the computers on board the Enterprise are being upgraded with the help of a species that we're introduced to called the Binars, which we really don't see again in the shows, a few times in the books and then later on in Lower Decks, but not for a long time. Picard and Riker, in one of the parts of the episode that don't quite work as well, are in the holodeck, while Riker is lured there by an alteration to his jazzy holodeck program that he is testing out by a creation of the Binars. And we end up with a situation where the Binars basically hijack the Enterprise for their own needs. And I like the way this plays out, and it's one of the really good early examples of a species that is very interesting and unique. The way the Binars culture is set up and their assimilation of technology, and just it's really interesting and has something that's very different. It feels something that's a little more alien than sometimes Star Trek goes into. And you can see their perspective too, this idea of like, well, why don't you just ask for our help? And they said, well, because you might have said no. And it's just an interesting way of getting into their mindset and their philosophies, and within a short little episode like this, getting kind of an idea of what their culture is like, and I think it works well. I like them. So overall, I think it's a pretty fun episode, one that I rewatch from season 1. And then one that just does not work for me. I remember seeing this one a bunch, especially in reruns for some reason as a kid, but too short a season, where an elderly Starfleet admiral is revisiting a ghost from his past by needing to help negotiate the release of hostages on a planet where he, and early on in his career, made a mistake, and that society is really paying for his error decades later, and he becomes obsessed with trying to reobtain his youth and escape the demons of his past, and doesn't work out very well. And overall, it's just one that felt very much like some of the other not so great episodes in season 1, where it felt more like a rough draft of a story that went into production. That's not, again, there are different reasons why there are different levels of the quality within season 1. It's a lot to get into. It's really fun, but that's just, in a very general sense, what the feeling of it is. And it's just one that I think has some interesting ideas. It doesn't quite work, and it also relies very heavily on the performances of its guest stars, and I don't think it's quite sold as well as it could have been through the performances. And it's also has some of the worst old age makeup I have ever seen, which is bizarre because in general, makeup is one of the areas where Star Trek has always excelled. Even at this point in season 1 of TNG, there are still some really good examples in there. And even with old age makeup, Star Trek tends to do a pretty good job. Even earlier in the season, the ancient bones going through the corridor with Data, that's so much better than this. It just, I don't know what happened here, because there's so many things. Again, the makeup feels like it's kind of not quite there, not quite finished. So it's one of those that I've caught glimpses of again and again over the years, but it's not one that I ever really go back to. I've probably watched it in full. This might be the 3rd time ever, which is, for Star Trek, a show where most episodes I've seen like 300 times. It's just one that I don't think is outright terrible, but it's a very mediocre, forgettable one that just doesn't quite accomplish what it's trying to with its story. And we'll leave it there for now. Again, I'll go through a bunch more in the next one of Zeke. I'm close to wrapping up season 1, and I just want to leave with a question. What Star Trek books or comic books are you currently reading? I've been reading a lot of good stuff, and some new books have just come out. I'm going to get into that new Strange New Worlds book, and I just finished reading the short Star Trek Voyager Captain Proton adventure that my wife found for me, so I'll be talking about that in another video. So I've been reading a lot of interesting Star Trek stuff recently. That book, A Hard Rain, was fantastic from TNG line. Go ahead and check out that video. So I'd love to hear, what have you been reading that is Star Trek related?